Welcome back. I've got Steve Tashjian online. Steve, how are you?
I'm doing great, Michael. Thank you so much for having me this morning.
I am really looking forward to this
Me
conversation. You
too.
do
Me
some
too.
amazing work. So why don't you share a little bit about you for those that don't know you, and then we'll jump in the conversation.
I've been consulting now as a high performance consultant for the past 3 years, coming off of 2 decades of work in elite sport. I'm a physical therapist and performance coach by trade, but over the course of the last 20 years, just had the opportunity to be in highly pressurized environments, learning from great leaders, understanding dynamics of really great high performing teams and starting to see which circumstances lead to high performance outcomes and which ones don't. And slowly over time, dealing with the elite athlete and dealing with the complexity of the systems that are required to really be effective in that, I started to feel my connection to really serving. I think, as you kind of progress through your career, you start to get a better, clearer picture on why you're doing what you're doing. I think you're passionate about it, but you might not necessarily know why you're passionate about it. And over time, I found that that was my outlet, whether it was performing arts in my history as a musician or as a medical practitioner or performance coach. In the end, what I found is it's about serving something, and now what I felt is the connection to that purpose is more around using what I've learned over time for how to excel in high performing environments, pressurized environments, and trying to provide that knowledge for other individuals in those circumstances. Taking experiences from either my time in the Premier League in England or, leading the men's national team to the World Cup with an amazing head coach under Greg Berhalter. That was an amazing experience too, just to feel what that feels like to have the country's expectations on your shoulders was something that I think I can help people understand how to navigate things like that, regardless of whether it's in sport, business, the performing arts, and that brings me to this point in my career where I feel like I'm here to serve those who are seeking high performance.
I see a lot of cross-pollination in a lot
Yeah.
of different things, and I'll comment on Premier League for a moment, and
Mm.
I highly encourage my American brethren really dive into this because I tell you what, I mean, I know Sundays are crazy. I get it.
Yeah.
Watching the NFL, I get it. I know fans are just, really excited for their teams. Then there's the Premier League, and then there's the
Mm.
fans in Tottenham or Liverpool or Man U or all the other Chelsea, all the other teams that are out there. The and I'm watching it on television, and the energy that's coming through the screen and in my ears is like, what in the world is this? And I can only imagine being near the pitch in those arenas, just the electricity is just it sends tingles down my spine. And I wasn't originally a football, Americans call it soccer, a football fan, growing up. I never
Yeah.
played. My
Mm.
brother did a little bit, but I always
Mm.
wanted to learn. And then, a few years ago, I was like, you know what? It's on my subscription. I had a subscription. I think it was to
Yeah.
the Zone or something, and it was on there. I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna watch. And I'm watching this, and I'm like, oh my goodness, what in the world's going on? And it appropriately named Premier League. These are
Yeah.
the best of the best. And, you know, if you don't make the top, was it 20? I think teams, you get bumped.
17.
17,
Yeah.
that's right,
18,
17.
18, 19,
18.
and 20 get relegated. Yeah. It's
Yeah, they get
amazing.
relegated down, and it's like, that'd be the equivalent of, okay, let's say the NFL. Okay, the
Right.
bottom three teams is like, instead of hearing who Mel Kiper Jr. is going to say they're going to pick, they're like, you don't get to participate in this league.
Yeah. You go to the UFL,
Yeah, you go there, or
XFL. Right.
whatever league tries again for spring
Absolutely.
football. Um,
Absolutely.
so it's like you guys don't, you're gone, or Major League Baseball, the bottom tier, you're gone. It's like how Jack Welch of them, it's like the bottom 10%,
I,
you're out. But it holds you accountable, and as a
yeah.
leader and as a performer. And we see this in sport, if you're not good enough, you're not going to play.
Mm.
And companies, I mean, it's harsh, but it's like, do you want your company to succeed? Well, you want to have the players to perform at their optimum best. You got to create the environment for them to, operate that. And I think that's where your work and obviously in the sports side of things, seeing, and getting the best of performance, so many synergies. So,
Yeah, for
so,
sure. It's pressure,
oh
right?
yeah.
It comes down to pressure. I think whether you're talking about the potential for relegation in the English Premier League or any European league for that matter, or you're talking about the volatility of corporate world at the moment, or you're just navigating the pressures of trying to provide for your family in this moment in this particular economy. There's proof of that need for understanding how to deal with pressure everywhere. I was reading in, I think it was Hunger in Paradise, Rasmus Ankerson's book, Hunger in Paradise. And I think they're interviewing the CEO of SAP, and he says something along the lines of every company, regardless of who they are, regardless of their net worth, is 5 years away from bankruptcy, which I think is an incredible statement to really think about when you're looking at the type of net worth that you see in some of these Fortune 500 companies. To think that they're also in that category really does highlight the type of pressure that we're dealing with everywhere. And I think it's important to understand how to navigate some of those things in a way where you make it a little bit more predictable.
Stat I share all the time on the show is 52% of the Fortune 500 from the year 2000 are gone. They don't exist
Mm,
anymore. Over
mm,
half of them.
right.
And you think, wait a minute, these are like,
How?
how? And
Yeah.
there was a pharmaceutical company in San Diego, it had a valuation of $6 billion. They're out of
Mm,
business. They're gone.
mm,
And there was reasons why, that
mm-hmm,
happened, but
mm-hmm,
it's most of us go $6 billion. We're like, does that calculator actually go up that high? Does that
mm-hmm,
work? Or are you going to get that little E symbol and a one plus whatever that it does on old calculators? But
mm-hmm.
it's again, there's pressure, but the thing of it is, I find too many people try to avoid it. They try to avoid pressure instead of this is a growth opportunity. This is how I get better. You think
Yeah.
of the elite athletes, that were at the absolute top of their game throughout their career. Kobe Bryant comes to mind because he was just tenacious to a T. And there are other athletes that are just you don't hear them as much, but they're in the weight room. They're doing everything. They're studying plays. I mean, they are. It is a performing art in a way. I see the
Mm-hmm.
synergies between,
Yeah.
athletes and artists are performers, and they're going out there and they're like, I need to be my best. Why? Because I want the rings. I want,
Mm-hmm.
and after I get the ring, what do I want? I want the ring again. It's like that hunger for the great ones never goes away. And
Mm-hmm.
it's inspiring to see. And as a company or a leader, you go, okay, how do we get some of that? How do we
Yeah.
build that within? And I think
Mm.
that's, some of the amazing work you're doing is you're helping those people find that. And I'm guessing, correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of that desire and talent and the ability for them to be the top performers are already in their four walls. They just got to
Mm.
figure out a way to get it out of them.
Yeah, I think it's multifaceted. I think everybody would agree with that, whether you're dealing with pressure in the athletic arena or if you're dealing with in the corporate space in boardrooms. I think a great example, if we continue to kind of go down that rabbit hole with a Kobe Bryant or individuals that have shown greatness in times of pressure, you know, I think they want the ball in those moments for very specific reasons. I don't think it's coincidental that when you investigate most of these individuals, they're highly prepared for those moments. And you hear quite often about the hours of work when nobody's watching, and um, I don't think it's a coincidence that those people will ask for the ball in those moments. Preparation makes chaos more predictable. When you're thinking about some of the cliches, we don't rise to the level of our goals, we fall to the levels of our systems and our processes. Like that's very, very relevant here. And more often than not, the agility needed to navigate, a volatile economy, the agility needed to look at circumstances from week to week, Sunday to Sunday in the NFL, whatever it might be, and make the adjustments necessary to deal with a trend you don't want, really does come down to whether or not that particular organization, group, individual has the processes, has the systems, and the learning mindset to really navigate through something like that. And I think a lot of times that's what I'll find in my consulting is when you're dealing with situations where people don't know what's going on, which, help us figure this out. A lot of times what I'll find is when I'm asking them to give me what their foundations are, it's not as clearly defined as I think you would want it to be. Even things as simple as the alignment around the identity of the organization. What direction are we going in? Why are we doing what we're doing? Sometimes that's not super clear. You need to fall back on some things that feel secure when things get unpredictable, or now all of a sudden the chaos becomes overwhelming. Because now you're grasping at straws. Well, maybe this will work. Maybe this will work. Maybe that'll work because you don't know. I think the World Cup was a really great example of that for us. You've got 4 years, a 4 year cycle to prepare for something like that. And if you're thinking about it from the top of your head, the World Cup should be the most nerve wracking event we have to deal with as a coaching staff and as a player group in that 4 year cycle. But really, it wasn't. Michael, when I got there, at least, it's definitely from a player health and performance perspective, which was my role with the national team. When we were looking at player health, safety, and performance, what we wanted to know was that we knew our process. So those 4 years can't go wasted. Every time there's a tournament early in the cycle and it's in unbearable heat in the United States in the summer. Well, let's use that as a chance to understand what our heat mitigation strategies are going to be for the World Cup. If we're playing a tournament at elevation in Denver for a tournament in the middle of the cycle, well, let's understand what our altitude practices are going to be for when we have to face Mexico and Mexico City in World Cup qualifying. All these things need to be seen as what they are in the moment, but what they also are in terms of our understanding of who we can be and what our processes are. So we learned from all of them. We said, this is how we're going to attack this situation based on the circumstances. And then when we come out of the backside of it, we're going to be a learning organization. We're going to understand complex systems need us to be a feedback loop that continues to refine ourselves. And when you live that trait characteristic as an organization, you continue to move through difficult situations, learn from them, and you're more prepared for the next one. I think that's how you create agility. And when we did get to the World Cup, I wasn't nervous. I wasn't anxious. We knew who we were. We knew how we operate. We knew how we keep players safe. We knew how we keep players fit. And I felt like it was a really great moment for our department to be able to execute the way we did, understanding that we had clarity. We weren't thinking about chaos. We weren't thinking about what's next. We just settled on who we knew we were. And we were really effective in those moments because we were prepared. And I think that's a big key of dealing with pressure, is really having an organization that's used every circumstance across their timeline as an opportunity to create another chapter in a playbook that now allows you to deal with another circumstance that's similar. So I think that's a lot of things that I see that are missing.
Yeah, and I think, and you hit it on the head, a lot of organizations, they have systems, but the majority of people don't understand them all, or they have leadership that are, forever and ever, amen, married to some of these systems when
Mhm.
they aren't working. They never really did work. They never will work, and there are other
Mhm.
opportunities to do it, but sometimes they just cling on. They don't want to let go because of uncertainty, and it's the devil they know. It's like, well, yeah, but you're holding yourself back, and
Mhm.
when you see, teams, do really well, whether it's in a corporate setting or on a pitch or on a court or on the field, I'm a big systems guy. I grew up in Detroit, so I, watch the Red Wings, for a quarter century just
An alliance.
Well, Lions,
On
here's
the
the deal.
opposite end. Yeah.
The Lions have been good recently.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't believe it. I'm
Not
sorry.
historically, right?
I'm jaded. I'm going to be like, if they somehow win the Super Bowl, I'll be mad because I threw money at the Bears. I'm like, why not?
Right.
But not that I'm a betting person, but I'm like, you know what? I'm going to bet on the Bears. Why? Why
Yeah.
not? Not the smartest bet. I mean, Kansas City's probably a better bet, or Philly or something like that. But yeah, the odds were like, yeah, why not? What the heck?
Not as exciting as the Bears, right?
Yeah. So yeah, I growing up, I saw, the system that was in place and how they recruited players, and the turnaround team. And it makes me actually a fan of college basketball. Football, I love college football too, but I like college basketball, especially the coaches like Coach K, for example, at Duke. He had a long, long run
Yeah.
of going to the Final Four every 2 to 3 years, give or take, you are completely turning over your team. In an corporate setting, if you have that kind of turnover, everybody's going,
Tough.
what are you doing? But because they don't have a system to be able to manage that. Coach K and a lot of the other programs do. Same thing with, other teams, that have done well year after year after year. There's a turnover, but college basketball in particular is one of those areas. Is like you got a completely different team, and here we are again. It's late March, and who's playing? And it's I always admire that, more than, of
Hmm.
course, I admire the players and the tenacity, and they got to study, and they're all, and that age is tough. Okay, we
Hmm.
we all know that, for those of us that can remember that far back. It's tough, but when you look at how systems go, not that I want to say it makes the parts interchangeable, but it does. It gives you some flexibility. So you got a colleague that's out, someone steps in, they do it, and things move smooth sailing. Client doesn't see any difference. Deliverables are rock solid. You crush it. You continue to grow, and
Hmm.
it creates this flow. And I've seen that. In football, the European, not the American one. You can watch, especially if you get a wider, screen. You can see plays develop, and you see how things are going, and it's as if it's in slow motion because
Hmm.
you're seeing things flow, and the athletes know what to do. They're running at the right speed. They're adjusting. They're looking, they're doing like five things at once. And you're like, how in the world do they know that that's where it was going to go? I mean, that was the plan, but everything, there's all these moving parts. But again, like the example you gave, and, with the men's team, prepare, 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 prepare. It's like a musical, or you're going out on concert, or you're going out on tour. You practice, you prepare, you prayer. I know AI,
Hmm.
not the artificial intelligence, the original AI for the
Yeah.
Sixers. Not a big fan of practice, but practice gets you rings, and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it's just I am a big fan of systems because in that way it's going to work. And
Yeah.
when you
And I,
go
yeah.
in, go ahead.
And I do think soccer is an um, interesting analogy here because there's a because of the free flowing nature of it and the lack of timeouts and the difference between something like soccer and the NFL where plays are scripted. And this is what we're doing. Here are your options. There's precision in your execution. And there is a belief that if we operate with, the Bill Walsh mentality of these are our standards, we execute our role to the highest standard, then you're going to be successful, overall, more often than not. But it's different in something like soccer where the play is free flowing and not only are your movements happening in a combination of scripted versus improvisation, but the your opponent is doing the same thing. So really success for me in those instances is providing frameworks for decision making, and that's where it's really, really similar to the way in which high performing organizations can be successful. So it's and that's where the systems theory comes into place here. But I think some of it gets blocked by when we enter into circumstances and our bias changes our opinions on what's needed for the moment or changes our willingness to connect and collaborate. We start, uh, fear, anxiety has a very interesting effect on the way we collaborate, depending on who you are. In and of itself, by itself, without stress, collaboration is a risk. We collaborate, our level of collaboration is directly related to the level of risk we evaluate in the situation because we're resigning to the fact that the outcome is now not totally under our control. So if I'm going to collaborate in any given situation, it's because I feel comfortable taking that risk. Well, how do you create comfort taking risk in those situations? That's the piece where, the culture and alignment around who you are and what you're doing and the appraisal of the success of your systems and processes, historically will start to open up your willingness to take that risk and continue to connect because more often than not, you'll probably see that in those situations, the more open you were, the more successful you were. But it's hard. It's hard, man. Leadership is isolating and it's lonely. And the higher and higher up the chain you go, the lonelier it gets. And you get zero credit, but you take all the blame. And eventually those types of pressures and leadership positions, unless you've got, a history of being very successful in collaborative ways, you could find yourself through your biases getting more closed off as pressure builds, and that's a hallmark. Influence of bias is a hallmark in some of the cataclysmic collapses of some huge companies. Nokia, Blockbuster, Kodak. You can kind of go down the list, and it came down to bias really, and an inability to kind of openly see the need to take risk and be collaborative and listen to diverse ideas about, hey, the market's changing. We need to change too. Netflix is going to put us out of business. No, it's not. Those types of decisions are very, very interesting. And I think overall, it's the loneliness under that stress that I think leads to a lot of really poor decisions that take place.
Yep. We've seen history time and time again
Yeah.
repeat or rhyme anyway.
Mm.
Organizations that say, no, this is how it's always been done. Well, always and never
Dangerous.
dangerous way to play games. So I've loved this
Hmm.
conversation. Steve, where can people find out more about you and all this amazing work you're doing?
You can catch me quickly on our website. The company's called the Elevation Project. The website is Elevation Pro X, the letter X, elevationprox.com. I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn. And then on Instagram is another great way, at S Tashjian on Instagram. Yeah, I really appreciate the time. Thank you, Michael. This has been
Well,
great.
well, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you. And thanks again for being on the show.
Absolutely.